welcome back to the Fwooshcast. It's Tony and Nick, your Fwoosh buddies here. Sorry we had a week off last week.
That was my fault.
Well, it was your fault. It was my fault. It was the world's fault. We're just playing around on parallel Earths, and we're back though now. Speaking of parallel Earths. I don't know. That's just because it's sort of become an unintentional running theme. I just want to do the postmortem on your Kansas City Royals because I made a joke about a month ago on the podcast towards the end of the regular baseball season, mentioning that they had such a great year this year for the first time, but that I thought, they probably still won't make the postseason. Well, not only did they make the postseason, they won the American League pennant and went to the World Series and took the Giants all the way to Game 7.
To the last out.
So, congratulations, Kansas City Royals, and you have a bright future.
Yeah, they I think they did everyone proud as far as their fans go and the city goes and whatnot. It doesn't make it any less difficult to process that, but it was a heartbreaker. But at the same time, I'm hoping you're right, and there is definitely a bright future ahead of this team.
Yeah, because that's certainly a super young team. There's a couple of veteran pitchers in the mix that they picked up as free agents, but it's not. It's not a team of cobbled together all-stars that have to win it this year, or that's it, or guys who are at the peak of their career, and it's the this is definitely a bunch of really cool kids that gelled in a great way this year for the first time, but no reason to think that they're not just going to get better and better, I think.
Yeah, definitely, and it's a funny thing because I always follow them throughout the year. But seeing how I do not live in the area anymore, it's rare that I actually get to watch a Royals game. So as an interesting segue, this team also got me actually to be able to watch not only baseball on TV, but TV in general. Because even though I am not the best TV watcher in the world, it seems that there are a lot of interesting things going on television right now.
Well, there certainly are. So I'd like to pontificate a little bit about the new fall season. It's obvious. It's not even worth pointing out at this point that there is so much. I don't know what you want to call it, nerd TV or comic book, based properties on TV. At this point, you could probably watch primetime TV if you weren't, time shifting, if you were watching it as it comes on, you could watch Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 every day, and you could probably watch nothing but comic book shows. If you wanted, which is kind of amazing because I remember watching, not only the Wonder Woman and Hulk TV series in the 70s, which, were great for their time, but also, the other schlock that would come on, the Captain America TV movies and the Spider-Man TV movies, and to watch that stuff when it came on was like, talk about, someone starved, a child starved for his live action entertainment.
Right.
Those were like momentous and, awful, like super, especially the Captain America one, super disappointing, but that did not stop it from being a momentous just to see Captain. So to think back, that's where we started, and now it's like, oh yeah, every night of the week, the entire primetime schedule is, and a lot of good stuff too. So I don't know, it's let's give a little applause for
definitely
comic books and nerds taking over the world. God, we won't even get started on Marvel's Phase 3 movie announcement.
Oh, I know. I have a feeling that we'll probably need to carve out some time to talk about that because even though it had long been rumored, several of the movies that will be coming out are very, very exciting. But I know that you and I will probably want to devote some time to talking about a certain Inhumans movie that we're still 3 years away or however long away it is now. But that made my afternoon that day.
Nick, I saw that afternoon, and it's like, oh my God, Doctor
Yeah.
Strange, oh my God, Black Panther, oh, the Infinity thing, it's finally going to culminate with Thanos in a 2-parter, and all this other stuff. But you know what? The only thing that was just running through my head over and over and over, Marvel Legends Infinite Lockjaw figure.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Isn't it crazy how the movie you've been waiting for so long spends 10 glorious seconds at the top of your mind, and then you instantly start thinking about the action figure possibilities that come just from the movie alone. So hopefully, if Hasbro's on the ball and Marvel is with them, even no matter how a movie like The Inhumans would turn out in the box office or on screen or whatever, at least we're probably gonna get some toys.
Yeah. Now, I mean, if they knew enough to put Rocket and Groot in the spotlight from Guardians of the Galaxy, both in the the hype of it and the merchandise, they've got to do that with Lockjaw, right?
Yeah,
right?
You would think.
Oh God! So this is the thing, though. If I put off for yet another 2 years making my attempt at a Lockjaw custom action figure, and they end up still not making him, I don't know what I'm going to do at that point.
Well, hopefully this podcast will be still going strong by that point, and we can have a whole hour dedicated to drowning our sorrows in the difficulties that is going to come, the difficulties that are going to come from actually having to construct such a custom.
I'll throw myself right in those fucking Terrigen mists and breathe that shit until I'm dead. All right, so back to the TV stuff, because that's going to be a whole other thing. So, there's so much this. There's no way. I was just about to say there's no way any one person could watch all of it, but I know that's wrong, because I know there's so many fanboys out there.
Of DVR.
Yeah. But let's just say that I'm not able to watch all of it. But the stuff that I was most interested in, the two that loom sort of largest on my radar that are coming back from last year are Arrow and Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Right.
And that's last season was a real interesting interplay between those two shows, because they were both on primetime broadcast TV, and you had one Marvel, one DC, and it was interesting the way that they were received by fans very, very differently. I mean, some people enjoyed them both, like myself. Some people probably didn't like either of them, but there was a real Marvel's better than Arrow, Arrow's better than Marvel, which was kind of funny to watch. I don't know if you observed any of that from afar, but
well, I think just with the way that Marvel DC fan bases can split themselves like political lines, I think that was probably destined to happen, at least to some extreme.
Yeah, but it was interesting to see this season when they both came back on, where they stood and how that went, but they're really two different shows. I mean, we're talking about two, comic book based, action-y primetime TV shows. So in that sense, you can put them in the same. But as these things go, it's really kind of apples and oranges. I mean, Marvel's Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. really started out as kind of a, for lack of a better word, a normal primetime show, drama, action-y show, that in terms of writing, tone, style, was very much in the norm. You could almost say it was like an NCIS Los Angeles in terms of the production style and the story formulas and stuff like that. And I think a lot of people, gave it a thumbs down based on that, because that kind of stuff is what it is. It can be well done or it can be poorly done, like anything, but it is pretty straightforward and not super inventive. And
do you think any of that has to come from being on one of the major networks?
Yeah,
they're trying to expand the appeal to
absolutely
the normal TV crowd.
Yeah, and I think that's true of all these shows, but going about it in different ways. But I think they were also, they obviously had the whole season, written out in one shot, and they knew that they were hooked into, continuity-wise, Captain America's The Winter Soldier, which came in just about halfway through their season. So they were really playing the long game in terms of waiting for that shift, that really, crazy Hail Hydra shift,
right?
That they locked into continuity-wise, and then it changed the whole show. But in doing so, I think they might have lost a lot of viewers early on because who felt it was just a little too pedestrian, and the characters weren't super interesting and stuff. But it did turn out, it did build and build, and certainly after that switch, there was some really cool stuff that happened. Arrow, on the other hand, first had a head start because Arrow was in its second season last year, whereas S.H.I.E.L.D. was in its first. But it's a totally different show. I mean, it is, if Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is the mainstream primetime broadcast network show, Arrow is a melodrama. It's a soap. It's CW, Smallville, One Tree Hill-ish type show, and they did a lot of things right on Arrow, even though they're sort of building from that model. They did add a lot more action. It is shot in a way that's much more specific tonally in terms of everything from settings and filters and the
right.
production design and stuff is more interesting, and so it's not just a Smallville type show, but it's built from that DNA. It's a soap. The writing, the acting is that kind of soapy melodrama. So that obviously turns a lot of people off. And in my opinion, it's and I say this with some trepidation, it's not a good show. It's and this is what
from what perspective do you mean?
Well,
though? I mean,
this is what I mean. I mean, I mean this in the most objective way possible. Such a subjective statement, but it's interesting just to take a little sidebar. A lot of comic book fans of this kind of material have a real chip on their shoulder about the stuff that they enjoy, the stuff that they like. Everyone has come from a different experience, and there is the whole there's still a lot of stigma I think people experience sometimes. Oh, you like that stuff? That's dumb. That's dumb. That's stupid. People can be very sensitive to that. So what that means is they sometimes are real defensive if you criticize that type of material at all. Now, don't get me wrong. They'll criticize something if it isn't like it is in the comic book, if the adaptation isn't good, if the costume doesn't look right, that sort of superficial stuff. But if they feel that you're saying that something is dumb or not good just because it's a comic book property, they're very defensive about that, and that's not where I'm coming from. What I mean is there's a lot of stuff that in the entertainment world, whether it's art, music, TV, movies, that is not good, but still worth watching and still enjoyable entertainment. And not even ironically, not like Plan 9 from Outer Space, where it's like, oh my god, it's a B movie, it's so bad, it's good. I don't even mean that. I just mean stuff that that you can watch and enjoy, and get a little thrill out of watching, but you can also sit back and say, this isn't really good.
Here's one of my observations on something like this, being an outsider as as someone who does not watch the show. Towards the end of the Bruce Timm animated Justice League television show, I honestly think that as good as that show was, they could have actually just turned it into a flip book of, here's your favorite DC character drawn in the Bruce Timm style and on your television screen. So and the show would have had the audience to go on. Now, one of the things that I hear when I hear people talking about Arrow is that there are some people who are genuine fans of the show. And I understand that, and people who are fans of Green Arrow really enjoy seeing, his adventures played out on the television screen. But it seems like one of the things that DC has really been doing with their TV shows is really giving you a cavalcade of characters that come through, either in, small supporting bits, one shots, things like that. And a lot of the discussion that I hear coming around things like Arrow and whatnot is like, oh, can you believe so and so is on the show? And oh, I saw Deathstroke on the show, and he may have a larger role or whatever.
Right.
But a lot of the times when I hear people discussing it, it's just over the fact that character A turned up on the show, and
or
then
was
I don't
mentioned
hear anything about it.
Right, or was mentioned in an Easter egg. Yeah,
Right.
No,
Right.
that is definitely it's sort of like the idea of just fan service, but at the expense of any actual material,
Right.
any story or anything. And it's interesting because I want to touch on that a little more when we talk about CW's other superhero show, The Flash. There definitely is that, and that was something I heard among the criticisms of Shield. Is a lot of people that didn't enjoy Shield said that they didn't enjoy it because there wasn't enough material from the comics. Well, how come there's no more? How come there's not enough comic? There's no comic characters. I don't care who these people are. I want to see, I want to see villains from the comics. I want to see that. And I get the appeal. Like, we're all watching these to a certain extent, at all, because they're based on properties that we're interested in. But I don't need to just see, like you said, here's your favorite character rendered in the Bruce Timm style. The end.
Right. Well, and my thing with any type of story, be it a comic, a television show, a movie, is that the show is called Arrow. So obviously, you want the time devoted to the development of that central character, and of course bringing on strong supporting characters is always a great thing. But when I hear people talking and getting excited about, oh, listen to all of these characters that have made, their appearances on these shows, and I know that the Smallville show was definitely doing that towards the end of its run on TV. So I get a little worried and turned off that they're just trying to deal and juggle too many characters, and then things start to meander, and then you kind of lose the entire point of the show originally.
Right. Well, yeah, I totally agree. Now, that said, I'll tell you what I like about Arrow, what I think they did right, and why I enjoy watching it, is they from the beginning, especially the first season, and actually, interestingly, this sort of has ebbed and flowed over the course of the second two seasons, but they really started off with a lot of action scenes.
Yeah.
Which, and I don't mean to say I just want to see a mindless action movie, but and not just, and when I say action, I'm not just talking about fight scenes, but literally sort of adventure-y storylines, active material, action active, which was very different from Smallville and some of those other ones that for probably in some ways out of necessity avoided that stuff.
Right.
There wasn't a lot of scenes with Tom Welling fighting people.
Right.
But so they knew that they needed that element, which is great, and it was real well done, especially in the first season. And then also they created this dual narrative with Oliver Queen's time on the island, because the show starts off, he's been missing for 5 years. He's been on this island,
right,
where he's learned to be a Green Arrow, and that story slowly unfolds for the viewer over the course of the show. Usually it was like 2/3 present day, 1/3 flashback, and quite often from episode to episode, whatever was happening in the flashback sort of thematically interwove with what was happening in the present day thing, kind of like a reverse Lost. like in the first couple of seasons of Lost, where they would have a flashback remembering something that sort of tied into what was happening to them on the island, sort of like the reverse of that.
Right.
But it was cool, and because that narrative was really interesting to watch. It was with Slade Wilson and how they met and how that relationship developed, and Oliver's very beginning of his changing into the man he was today, and it's sort of this mystery of like, well, what happened? You kept wanting to find out what happened on the island, and more stuff would unfold, and then also just having that device of being able to switch between the two eras really, it was great to have for them. It was a great tool for them to have in terms of the plots and the storylines. It was also a great tool for them to have with character development, because you got to see Stephen Amell. I've never heard his name pronounced, but the gentleman who performs the role of Oliver Queen. You got to see him in these two different states, in the same episode, which was really, it was kind of a cool dichotomy. So that I think was the strong point. And like I said, the production design was really, they had a real, they have a very distinct vision of, like the color palette that they use, the way things are shot. It's a very distinct voice, which is kind of cool, which makes it more than just a Smallville type soap opera in a way. Or it actually kind of plays to the strengths of that sort of melodrama, in the sense that some of the photography is heightened or surreal slightly, which sort of supports, the fantasy elements of the story, which is kind of cool. So that's what I think they did right. But the writing, dialogue, certainly, and a lot of the acting, not of the first order. And not to disparage the actors, because the material they're getting is not always fantastic.
Right.
And there are some people on it that are great, but there's some people that are just sort of miscast. And probably the best example is the actress that plays soon to be the second Black Canary, Laurel Lance. It starts out in the first couple of seasons as an attorney, and her sister is the Black Canary. Her spoiler alert: her sister is killed this season in the first episode, and she's clearly going to become the new Black Canary. And it's two things wrong with that. Is one, it sort of goes back to a little bit what we were talking about, where it is a little bit of fan service, where there's not a lot of surprises in this show, in terms of, if someone appears, it's like, oh, that's Roy. He's going to become Speedy eventually. Mm-hmm. There's no, what's going to happen as soon as these characters are introduced or talked about and stuff. And so it kind of takes a little bit of the excitement out of it. Which was another reason why the desert, or the deserted island narrative was interesting, because we don't know what happened, what's going to happen there necessarily. But
right.
when when Laurel Lance, her sister, is killed, she's going to take, and on top of it, this actress is not the least bit believable as a crime fighting vixen.
Really?
And you've got, this scene where they shoehorn a way for her to meet Wildcat in a gym, Ted, what's Wildcat's name? Ted Grant, yeah. So she meets Ted Grant, and Ted Grant is, this 20-something Hispanic model who can, whose line readings are like about as flat as you can imagine. And as soon as she meets him on some, completely unrelated thing, she's investigating a case, and you're like, oh, he's going to train her to become Black Cadet, the whole thing. And then, sure enough, by the end of the episode, she comes back to see him, and he gives her a flyer, and this prop, this flyer that someone in the props department has made up, says in big yellow letters at the top, "Learn to fight." And it's like, yeah, and within about 3 episodes, she's going to be, a master martial artist, and be going toe to toe with all these, and so That is kind of the downside of the show. Now, just going back to Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., like I said, they hit that moment where they clicked into the movie universe with Hydra taking over S.H.I.E.L.D., and the whole show changed. And even a lot of the people that weren't enjoying the show admitted at that point it became a totally different show. Very cool, some interesting storylines. The thing that's interesting, the conundrum that they have hit this season, in my opinion, is it's become very Whedon-esque in that if you haven't been watching it from the beginning, you might be lost. Because they started, it was great. The very first episode, first they start off with a flashback with Peggy Carter and the Howling Commandos, which is going to tie into the fact that she's going to have a mid-season show coming up about the origins of S.H.I.E.L.D. And they jump right into the ongoing plot line that developed all through the first season. And there is very little, waiting for new watchers to catch up, which is a shame, doubly a shame, because they, probably lost so many viewers at the beginning of the first season, so you'd really want to pick them back up at the beginning of the second. But it's, and if you've been watching it, it's great. You don't miss a beat. And the dialogue, I don't know how much Joss himself writes in it, but it certainly has his voice. The interplay between the characters is great. And the fight choreography, it just keeps getting better and better. There's some, for a weekly TV show and the production resources available in terms of that, the actual stunts and fights and stuff on S.H.I.E.L.D. are getting really cool. There's a scene where Agent May, who is kind of one of the badass S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, takes on Blacklash with his big long whip, with the chain whip with the blade on the end, and there's a whole thing where she's, fainting and dodging, and she's, very cool. Whereas the stuff on Arrow that was so great in the first season is really become a lot of, punch right, punch left, punch right, punch left. So that's kind of an interesting dichotomy. And then there is The Flash, the new series, which a lot of people were heavily anticipating. They did a real build-up via the Arrow last year, introducing the character and stuff.
And that one just started.
It started actually the same week as Arrow, but yeah, this is the first season.
First season, right?
And so they've had 4 episodes now, I want to say, and it's a tough one because it is built on that same CW DNA that Arrow is,
right?
But because it knows, rightly so, that it's a brighter character, it's a different atmosphere that the Flash operates in versus Green Arrow. They lose a lot of the action, the grit, the contrasts and the shades and stuff. It's a lot more flat of a show. The dialogue and the acting is slightly below even that of Arrow. It's a tough one to hook into so far, and their sort of overarching plot narrative is that sort of Jeff Johns retcon of Professor Zoom coming back to kill his mother, which I don't know, it sort of feels wrong for the character, but also it plays against the show. I mean, it makes that whole sort of origin thing brings like this dark side to the Flash, but then you don't play, the show, the character is not that, so it's sort of trying to walk in both worlds, but is a master of neither.
Right.
If that makes any sense.
Absolutely.
And talk about the fan service. Now, Arrow has dropped a lot of characters, and either actually being on the show or being mentioned, over its time. But they usually are pretty good about them actually being characters, important to the story or involved in the story somehow. Flash, it has every 2 seconds it's a new thing. In fact, the last episode really felt like a backdoor pilot for a Firestorm series, which who knows why.
Right.
And there's even less surprises than there is in Arrow in terms of, I know who that is. That's Leonard Snart. He's going to be Captain Cold, and he's going to create the Rogues. So why do I need to watch the next 3 weeks? Because I know everything that's going to happen on the episode. And there's a lot of people a lot of elements just shoehorned in. It's not working for me as well so far. And also, this is an interesting thing, is they have a tough. It's in terms of the action portion of the show, because of his power set. It's tough. You don't show him just in a martial arts situation, which is exciting, something that you can shoot practically and is viscerally exciting to watch. You have to find ways to exhibit his super speed that isn't over in a split second, and that has some sort of energy or something that's driving you to watch it. I mean, that was a problem that they had with Smallville and Superman. They were restrained, I think, by production elements at the time in terms of how do you present his power set. But I don't know, it just makes for the climactic battle scenes are a little less engaging because of that.
So when you talk about these things, do you see this? I don't know. I guess kind of just the theme or the voice or whatever that you want to refer to as far as these shows go. Do you see that more of a DC thing, or do you see that more of a CW thing?
I definitely see it more as a CW thing. Mm-hmm. And whether that is sort of interchangeable with DC at this point, I don't know. But they definitely, there is that certain, can't quite put your finger on it. I'm sure some critic has written about it more articulately somewhere, but that sort of CW DNA. I always call it like the One Tree Hill. I don't even remember if One Tree Hill was on CW, honestly. But that's sort of, someone's in love with somebody shot through a filter, kind of thing. And speaking of the dialogue on Flash, I mean, you've got things like the scientist who is going to become Killer Frost at some point, because it's Killer. It's what, I can't remember her name, the character's name, but it's Killer Frost. And she's talking about her boyfriend Ronnie Raymond, who was killed in the nuclear reactor, or whatever. And someone says, well, what what was it like, being his girlfriend or whatever? And she says, we were like fire and ice. It's just, there's a lot of dialogue like that. So not great. But it's interesting that you say CW versus DC, because while Arrow and Flash are definitely cut from the same cloth, while one may be succeeding more than the other, the third DC show that premiered this year is wholly different, in my opinion.
Right.
And that's Gotham.
Now here's my thing about Gotham. I was really, 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 really going to devote the time to sit down and watch this show on a weekly basis, which if I can find a way to maybe get the time to catch up, I will. But it just so happens that I was excited about this show starting, and then two people that I actually work with, one of whom is a big Batman fan, and the other one really likes everything that he watches, be it movie or TV or whatever. And the day after the show premiered, I think it was a Tuesday, they both asked me about it, and I said, well, stuff happened. I didn't get a chance to sit down and watch it last night. And both of them gave me a resounding don't bother. So maybe I'm just listening to two people, and it scared me away from giving it a shot at the beginning. But I thought just what you were going to say, that this show was going to be different than the other DC shows that we're used to seeing. But then I got a little gun shy about it.
Well, interesting, because I actually think of, at least of these four shows that I'm talking about today, it's the best show.
Really?
Yeah, and it's interesting because that was the one I was watching sort of as an afterthought. It didn't, the idea of what this show was going to be, it didn't necessarily interest me a whole heck of a lot. It's a Batman show without Batman. It really sounded like, geez, Warner Brothers is really trying to milk, their Batman franchise, but they know they can't make a Batman TV show, so what can they do? Seemed really cynical and crass, and like, oh, this is going to be awful. And the posters of like, oh, here's the Penguin when he was young, I was not interested, but I watched it, the first episode, and I have to say, they're doing a good job. I think this is a good show.
Good.
The question of how do you make a Batman show without Batman, they sort of answered in a very simple way. It's not a Batman show. It's Jim Gordon.
Right.
Jim Gordon is the main character, and there's no two ways about that. Bruce does, he is a recurring character and fits in, obviously, is right in the middle of the whole main narrative, which really is kind of, still more or less, who killed the Waynes, but is extrapolated into more of a Jim Gordon trying to unravel all the corrupt layers of Gotham.
Right.
Now this is a Fox show, so it's interesting because the production, the people behind it are totally different than CW, and it's totally not made from that type of model. It's at its bones, it's a police procedural, almost like a Law and Order or something. But then with the overarching narrative, and then of course it's set in a sort of nowhere place, which is really cool. And it didn't even necessarily occur to me till I started watching it, the problems that they would have encountered with how do you build Gotham in terms of time and place on a weekly program. Because it's one thing, because Gotham is kind of like a nowhere place, a Neverland. It's not really real in time or place. In some sense, it's stuck in this sort of Art Deco 30s, film noir kind of thing. But you're obviously not setting it in a period way. And then also just how it looks, how it feels, how it sounds. It's one thing to create that if you're Tim Burton or if you're Chris Nolan in a film that someone's going to come and watch for 2 hours and then leave. But when you're talking about a weekly TV show with characters and dealing with plot lines that go, how do you create that world that is still flexible enough to hold that weekly life? And they really figured it out. It's even down to the technology. They can't avoid. They can't set it in a period where there's no computers or cell phones, even though Gotham feels like it wants to be that 1930s, 1940s. They can't avoid that, but whenever they have computers, they're cathode ray, monitors, and they're very workstations aren't particularly lit. It doesn't ever show this. When someone gets on the computer to look something up, they don't show the screen. They shoot it from the other side, so you see the person's face, as opposed to Arrow, where everything is a native ad for Microsoft, and someone says, oh, "Hang on, I have to get my slate," or whatever that thing is called that nobody would be using. And like cell phones, on Gotham, they're all flip phones, and again, it never shows. You never can really see the phone if you were trying to figure out, what model phone is that. It's dark. They don't ever have an insert of someone pressing numbers or a text message coming up. They're using it, in a way that they have to, but they're really de-emphasizing it. The cars are all sort of like late 70s, early 80s model cars, but the gangsters' cars are clean and waxed and shiny, and then the police cars are dirt. So they make the distinction between the condition of the car as opposed to the make and model. So it's really cool the way they've sort of, and the same thing with the costumes. They don't look like they're walked out of the French Connection or something, but they also are pretty timeless. Nobody is wearing anything that pegs them to a certain time, and each character's wardrobe is selected to emphasize the character points rather than something that CW might do, which is this is what's fashionable right now. This jacket is the current season or something. So that makes it kind of fun to watch and easier to melt yourself into the world of the show.
Yeah,
which is
no,
kind of
I appreciate that level of at least concern as far as detail goes when dealing with a show like that, because I'll be honest with you, the idea of a police procedural starring Jim Gordon was the thing that originally attracted me to the show, and then when I started seeing more and more rogues and Batman, or Bruce Wayne rather, becoming more and more of a possible central character, that's when I got a little skittish about it. But I do like the thought of it being since it is a television, not Batman show. The fact that it's doing a good job in preserving the own world that it lives in really does make me appreciate it a lot more. And I think in the long run, if this show does end up being successful and it has a long run and people will look back on it fondly, it avoids all of those just easy pitfalls that it sounds like some of the other shows are hitting, where it just dates the show terribly,
Right.
When it's only like 5 years old.
Right. And the other thing, the thing that really I think sets it head and shoulders above the other three shows, even Marvel's Shield to a certain extent, is the casting. The cast, person for person, is operating at a much. Either they're operating at a much higher level, and or they've got better dialogue and material to work with, and or they're just better cast to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
But the cast and the acting is really above the other three shows. I never watched Homeland, or wait, no, not Homeland. What was that police show that Ben McKenzie was on? Southland.
Okay.
Yeah, I never watched that. I only knew him from the OC. So that was what Ben McKenzie was.
So you're
in my
admitting you
radar.
watched the OC.
Well, maybe a couple of episodes back in the day, but so I didn't have any expectations of him, and I didn't even know Donald Logue was going to be on it because he wasn't emphasized as much as some of the other characters.
What a weird resume that guy has.
Yeah, right. I mean, the Tao of Steve. Remember? I mean,
yeah.
But he is great. And Ben McKenzie is great. It kind of makes me want to go back and watch Southland now.
Okay.
He's really found, and I will say this is true about all of the characters on the show, some of them more than others, but really all of them, and especially Ben McKenzie as Jim Gordon, and then the young fellow who's playing Penguin. They're handed these roles with a lot to sort out. As an actor, it's like, how do you approach Jim Gordon? Because it's a really iconic role. People, a lot of the fans that are going to be watching this know a lot about the character already, or have notions about the character set in stone. There's a lot of expectations.
Well, and the fact that it's coming hot off the heels of Gary Oldman, who's probably had the greatest, screen portrayal of the character ever.
Right. And hot on the heels,
Yeah.
And like, how do you, where do you begin? And to their credit, I think they've really started from scratch. He's set aside any worry about meeting anyone's expectations or delivering any particular. He's really, I think, I'd love to interview him about it and find out. But it seems like he just said, okay, this is a brand new character on a brand new show, and I'm going to work with the script that I've got and what I know about this character from this. So you never get the traps that he could have fallen into, where you see the the way he says something or the way he looks, where you see what happens to him in the future. It's
Right.
never feels like that. It always feels like a present Jim Gordon who only knows what he knows now, only feels the way that he feels now. So he's a really interesting character. the idea of the one straight cop in a world of where everything is corrupt. That's been done, but it is very interesting. And his partner, Harvey Bullock, Donald Logue, is a great actor.
Yeah.
I mean, he brings a gravitas not only to the character but the whole show that really anchors the show in a great way. You never feel like you're watching something where someone's going to say, "We were like fire and ice," like.
Well, no, but I think that speaks to something that's good, because I think a character like Harvey Bullock is extremely easy to roll up into. The fat cop with the donut stereotype, who's taking it on on the side, and robbing from shawarma vendors or whatever it was, falafel vendors. But that's something that I can really appreciate, because having a character with actually some depth to it, as far as someone who is obviously integral for better or for worse in shaping the main character. I think if you lose that with the stereotypical Bullock that could happen, that's demeaning to your central character as well.
And yeah, absolutely agree. And they, the other great thing about his portrayal and the writing of the character in this show is that it is not predictable. They're definitely creating a complex, multi-layered Bullock. His motivations and stuff are very nuanced. Although he is, in one hand he is kind of that fat cop with the donut, taking stuff on the side, but there's more to him than that. And what that does is you don't know where it's going. A lot of people, after watching, you say, "Oh, I bet he's gonna do this," or "I bet he's gonna turn out to be like that. Or he's gonna come around. He's gonna be better. He's gonna be worse. I hope they don't do it this way. I hope he doesn't do that." Because people don't. It's not predictable right now. I don't know where he's going, and they're not necessarily beholden to doing every single thing the way it happened in the comics, and it's not written in a way where you feel like, oh, okay, clearly he's going to become the new Black Canary, and so that's kind of great.
Well, speaking of, and I don't know if it's being done on purpose or just these fantastic fan conspiracies that pop up from time to time, that even maybe taking that not knowing within the show without the winks and whatnot to another level, is that I think a popular rumor that's running around, or conspiracy that people are thinking, that there's a chance that even the character of Penguin may actually end up being the Joker on that show.
Oh, I saw that. Which that's funny. I'm thinking probably not.
Yeah.
But
still, I think it speaks to the less obvious nature that you were talking about with the
absolutely the fact that I could imagine how they would do. I could imagine how they would do that.
Mm-hmm.
Says it all.
Yeah.
The fact that and it's interesting because they, while it is. This goes back to the sort of the interesting tightrope that they walk with this show in terms of the setting and the tone. It is somewhat real, but it's a real superhero comic book show in the way that Game of Thrones is a real fantasy story, where there's not a lot of like crazy monsters and elves. Now, for anyone out there who's read all the Game of Thrones stuff, full disclosure, I've never read any of the books. I've only watched the HBO shows to this point. So to this point on the HBO shows, yes, there are dragons, and yes, there is some magical elements, but for the most part, it's like a medieval world where fire burns paper, and you know what I mean?
Right.
It's a very and Gotham is kind of the same way. Yes, there are some characters who are clearly gonna be criminally insane, maybe, and maybe gonna wear a funny costume, but it's basically a real place that they've created.
Well, then let me ask you this then, because it seems like the two shows that you prefer over the others are Gotham and then Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Mm-hmm. So they both seem to be going in different directions in the fact that Gotham appears to be, at least at this point in time, contained within itself, whereas Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. just from the very beginning with the casting of Clark Gregg in his role, is offering crossover to the cinematic universe that Marvel is, obviously flourishing right now. So what's your preference when it comes to that? Do you prefer the TV shows to be their own thing, or are you more appreciative of when you're going to tie the whole knot together, and in order to, maybe understand the entire Marvel cinematic universe, you better be paying attention to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.?
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of appreciate both.
Mm-hmm.
I really I love the idea that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. ties into the movies for many reasons, not the least of which is it's so long between movies, and I love the movies so much that the anticipation of the next movie,
right?
Like I can get my fix by watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. every week, and I love that it's not just a footnote to the movies. Well, and this has been the great thing about the Marvel movies is as much as they tie together, you could watch any one of them on its own, without necessarily knowing all the continuity of all the rest of them.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of how they're developing or it seems to be how they're developing the stuff with the Kree and Hydra's legacy back to World War II, seems like it's going to be really important to the upcoming Marvel movies, as opposed to just here's the stuff from the cutting room floor, or stuff that's not important. So it's kind of cool how not only that it ties in, but how closely it really does tie in. So I enjoy that. I appreciate that, and if it wasn't as well done, I probably wouldn't. But Clark Gregg is so great, and it's great to see the arc of that character. But then on the other hand, I'm enjoying Gotham the way it is. It's its own singular world, and I don't think I would want it to. Well, I don't think it could cross over with anything else at this point. But
right.
I would want it to spawn a Robin spin-off or something, whatever it might be. So I don't know. I kind of enjoy both. For their merits, as long as they're each done well.
Right.
Yeah. And I guess that the last thing I would say about Gotham is, in terms of the casting, is the guy playing Penguin, Robin Lord Taylor, I think is his name.
Mm-hmm. He seems to be getting a lot of attention right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting because talk about a tight line to walk, because you've got to create this character that is. It's a kooky, quote unquote kooky criminal.
Yeah.
Go back to the 40s, and it's a whole, the idea of the character, and most of the Gotham rogues, they're cartoony in that sense of pulpy, weird cartoons. But
and then I mean, you've got the majority exposure. Then speaking to Burgess Meredith and Danny DeVito.
Yeah.
So
for sure. He's done a really good job of creating a character where you see because the Penguin clearly wears these tuxedos or like fancy clothes that aren't really what normal people would wear, even normal wealthy people,
right.
Or something. And so it's like, well, why does someone wear that? In the 1950s comic book, he wore it because he was called the Penguin.
Right.
As simple as that. So it's like he's really torn apart. Like, well, where's this guy coming from? If this is sort of his genesis,
Mm-hmm.
and he's at turns he's a weak, submissive person, but also at the same time is like brutal and viciously ambitious. So you get to see it's like when he's essentially a powerless character, and he's getting kicked around and stuff a lot. But you can see how he is able to begin to orchestrate his power, and then when he's got some power, the way he uses it is in this sort of like vengeful, the kid who was always beat up on the playground is now gonna bring an AK-47 to school and like
right.
that kind of character. So and it feeds into the way he dresses and presents himself. He speaks in this sort of pretentious way, the way he uses words and stuff. which is coming from a place of weakness, but doesn't make him any less brutal and vicious, which is interesting. You don't see a lot of comic book villains like that.
Right. Well, I think, at the very least, then, just speaking for myself, I think you've convinced me to go ahead with my plan to go back and watch what I haven't watched so far as Gotham goes, and then get caught up to actually watch the show through the rest of the season, because it sounds like, even if the first episode had a few kinks to work out, that it's headed in a positive direction.
Yeah, and I could, if we had more time, I could find some nitpicks and crits. It's not a perfect show.
Right.
There are a few things, but my general consensus would be that's the breakout show after the first month of watching these. That's the one that I would watch. Shield, I think, continues to get is consistent and even getting better, just with the caveat that if you haven't been following it, you might be lost for a little while trying to catch up. Arrow, if you enjoyed it before, you're going to continue to enjoy it. It's more or less the same show that it's been. I don't think it's a good show, but that doesn't mean that it's not worth watching and enjoying. Flash, I'll say that the jury's out. I'm going to give it some more time, but it's right now it's kind of the runt of the litter. And then, just as a footnote before we wrap up, I was able to watch the first episode of Constantine. So only having watched the first episode and having never read Hellblazer, actually, surprisingly, because that was a comic book, in terms of my age and interests, which seems like would have been in my sweet spot, but somehow I never read that. Watched the first episode on a whim, very much enjoyed it.
Good.
So I don't know. Well, not enough sample size to give a full recommendation either way, but I'll probably watch some more of those.
Well, it doesn't seem like there's going to be any shortage of new comic book TV shows coming your way. So, at the very least, as we move on into the future, between just Marvel and DC, you're eventually going to have to pick and choose what you're going to watch, because it would become very difficult to watch all of them, and maybe that's to the benefit of all. I'm never one to appreciate oversaturation, but if shows are going to actually have to start competing with each other, then that might drive their need to be better.
Yeah, well, and then there's Marvel is right in the middle of production with all the Netflix stuff that comes out in May. So that's going to be a whole nother, salvo. I'm interested in those, especially Daredevil, just to see how they're going to do it, because I do have to say that when Marvel got Daredevil back, as ridiculous as that sounds, I was kind of sad that they didn't, start exploring another movie option with him. So I've got some hopefully high hopes for how they're going to handle Daredevil as a TV show, because he's always been one of my favorite Marvel characters. Yeah. Well, and I can see, I sort of share your, desire. It would have been great if they went full movie on him. But considering the slate that they had, the movie slate they have, it's hard to imagine fitting any more. That's
definitely true.
And of all the things, all the properties that they're working with, that would lend itself to television the best.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they're going the Netflix route is great, because. For a number of reasons, but the freedom that it gives them in terms of production, and the fact that they're probably all the episodes are gonna hit at once, so we can watch it in one weekend.
That's definitely more fitting into my schedule, because if I have an open night, generally I have an open night, so I can blast through 5 or 6 episodes and get through it. It's that weekly regimen that is very, very hard for me to meet.
All right, well, folks. That is our time for this week. We will come at you again a week after next. I just want to remind you that you can find the Fwooshcast on Facebook. You can shoot us an email at VB, that's VEEBEE, at thefwoosh.com. Leave us a comment, a criticism. Let us know what you want to talk about. Let us know